There it is. Okay. Believe it or not, everything is working.
Here we are.
Hey, Russ.
Hey, good
Okay.
afternoon.
Thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. I'm glad to do it.
And the whole time when you said yes, I was remembering something when I first met you. You were kind enough to do a couple of gigs. And being a drummer, I stood behind you and watched almost everything you were doing. And you were doing something then, and just now I was watching one of your preview to a lesson,
Okay.
and you were showing me how you do at the time. You were doing this thing where you would just play ghost with your left hand. You would ghost like eighths or sixteenths or something.
Okay.
And I was fascinated because then you would just accent two and four and
Oh, right. Okay.
right.
Yeah.
And then in one of your lessons, you were talking about keeping a pulse and then being able to play ahead and behind the groove and all that sort of stuff. So I want to just jump right into drum questions with you.
Okay. All right.
Because on your website, you've got a whole lot of lessons and things that you can do. And why I want to jump into the drum questions is when I also listened to your latest record, which I love.
Oh, the Giovanni record, the one with Giovanni. Yeah.
Right,
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
What I notice about your playing is this is just me, my take on it is the when you play, it's more of a part that you're playing instead of just playing the kit and just playing grooves. It sounds like you're playing parts to things, and when you do your solos,
Hmm.
you leave space. It's like you're having a conversation,
Yeah.
unlike instead of filling up all of the stuff. So
Right.
what is with all of that stuff that I just said, what's your what's your sort of concept and approach to playing?
Well, I started playing drums about 2 years ago, and I'm just joking. You know, let me tell you. There's a couple things to go over there. To answer your question about the ghosting stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I there was a couple people that influenced me with that. One of them was my friend David Garibaldi, who plays with Tower Power. I'm sure you know.
Right.
And years ago, I've known David for many years because we were both at Yamaha Drums I was there for 23 years, and I think David's been there for 40 some. But um, we would hang out together, and one of the things that he said to me was, and as far as those Tower Power style, which is really that's one of the fundamentals of what he developed with that band, was the motion of those ghost notes between the big notes, right? Our bass drum, snare drum, which sort of characterizes the groove. That's what we call the hook of the groove, right? Almost like the hook in the chorus of a song. Like, what's the hook of the groove? You know, boom, 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 bop, right? That's the hook. And
Right.
and then in between that, we create motion and we add colors and we can do all kinds of things. So one of the things he said to me was, you know, he tries to get his ghost notes and the hi-hat to have the same sort of tone so that you couldn't tell what was the hi-hat and what was a ghost note on the snare drum. And by doing that, he can use broken or syncopated rhythms with each hand to create continuous motion, right? So it's almost like you're hearing you're hearing this sort of flow of 16th notes that you kind of get out of that Tower Power thing if you think about it. But it's being created by multiple hands with syncopated rhythms, you know, and that's what kind of makes it really funky. And you hear the little accents and the articulation inside of it. So I really worked a lot on getting those ghost notes to create motion. And the ghost note is an implied note, right? That's sort of the definition of it. So it's you know, playing a boom, ga, boom, ga, and then boom, ga, and that little sort of motion that makes it funky and happens in there. And I apply it really to everything. I mean, if you listen to some of the Afro-Cuban and Afro-Brazilian playing on the To Become One record, which is the one you mentioned with Giovanni Hidalgo and I that just came out yesterday, um, playing that style is the same thing because I'm creating a lot of motion and trying to fill in those gaps where, because that music never had a drum set, right? I mean, it didn't. It
Right.
was created with hand percussion, and there was no drum set even involved until the mid 1960s when, um, you know, Changuito was playing with Lost Band Band, and he came up with drum set patterns we know as some of the songo patterns and the son clave drum set patterns. There was nothing until that, and I studied with him, Jose Quintana, who everybody
Hmm.
called Changuito, and he was the guy who kind of came up with Afro-Cuban or Latin drum set playing in a way, not Latin, but Afro-Cuban. And he played, it was almost like listening to a Latin or Afro-Cuban David Garibaldi. That's literally the way he played. It was, and in the lessons that I took with him, a lot of it was very similar. And so I ended up applying that in a lot of different styles.
You mentioned David, and I think I saw something where he was describing Oakland Stroke and some of those kinds of beats,
Uh-huh.
and he was saying that he derived it from a Latin kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, wouldn't you say that some of the Latin stuff that you play on that record and some of the funk stuff are kind of intermixed?
They are, as with every style, they all sort of interplay. And the better you are at one style, the better you become at other styles, as long as you have the ears enough to be open to do it, and to apply it in a musical way. But yeah, it works with everything. I mean, I laugh because Steve Gadd and I've kind of, I would joke with Gadd about, he's got one Latin pattern, which is kind of that Mozambique, boom, and he's like, yeah, Russ, I get a lot of mileage out of that, like he'll just play it right through everything, but it's so bad, it's so funky and like in the pocket, and it's so beautifully articulated that it just works, and he's like, man, I'll just wear that out, it doesn't matter if it's Afro-Cuban or Brazilian or Peru, or it doesn't matter, I'll just play that, and I love that because it was kind of a statement of confirming that, like, if you can create that motion and make it musical, it works through a lot of different styles, and it's just a matter of how you articulate it from that point forward.
Yeah, and that particular groove, you're right. It's the minute you hear that, and it's him. You
Yes.
know, nobody can really do it the way he does it.
No, no, no. He's that's the genius of him is, Gad has a palette of stuff that he's worked on, to uh, where the execution of them is at its unbelievable high level,
Mm,
and it doesn't have to be 1,000 things. It just has to be the right things executed really, really high, and that's what he does really well. That was a big lesson for me too with him.
mm.
And
What,
yeah, go ahead.
well, where did when did you? I'm going to kind of jump back a little bit because I know right now you're doing a lot of recording and sessions
Uh-huh.
work and everything. But how did you get your start playing drums? Is it something you wanted to do and just jumped right into, or did it come later? How did you start playing?
Well, I started. I was 8 years old. My a friend of mine played the drums, and my cousin played the drums. I actually started playing guitar, and it took me about 6 months to learn the theme to Batman. So I figured that probably wasn't for me, you know. And so I thought, well, let me try the drums. And a friend of mine was playing, and but back then, like you remember, for you too. I mean, we started. You took lessons. You started with a pad and a book and a pair of sticks. I mean, and I played on a pad for 2 years. for
Mm.
almost 2 years. And you got all your rudiments, and you got your hands working, and you learned how to read, and you did all that. Now kids, their first lesson, they go buy a double bass drum set at Guitar Center, but
Right.
that's not the way we learned. We learned a whole different
Right.
way. And so I started taking lessons right away. I was about 8, and I've never stopped. I've taken lessons my whole life, and I'm 18 now, so it's been 10 solid years of,
10
it's
years of playing.
I've been taking lessons for 42 years, believe it or not, and I've never stopped. I've been with Peter Erskine for the past about 8 or 9 years. I've been studying with him, and a lot of people over the years that I've spent time with and took lessons from. And I always just looked at it, to be honest, Jeff. It was like, Tom Brady he's got a quarterback coach, and Tiger Woods has a swing coach. I mean, these guys are the best in history at what they're doing, and they have a coach. They have somebody, a third party, helping them, looking at them from a third party view, and helping them do that. And I just think it's really important in that way. I'm no less serious about what I do than Tom Brady is. I mean, he makes more money at it than I do, but
Right.
we're both very serious about it. And that's the way it is. So anyway, long story short, I was very blessed because I grew up in a very small steelworkers town in Ohio, and there was really no way that I would ever be in the music business. There was nobody in my family. There was nowhere to do it. I mean, where am I going to do this at? And
Yeah.
the one thing there was two things that happened that were really important. The first one was my high school was just a public high school, but back then they had, like you remember, they had incredible arts departments, especially in the Midwest. And
Yeah.
and you were able to major like a college in my high school, so you could major in auto mechanics or home, what do you call it, home, where the girls were,
Home economics.
yeah,
Home,
economic,
home
yeah,
ec-
that kind of stuff. Well, you could major in music at my high school. It was just a public high school, so I had everything. I had the wind ensemble and the jazz band and the marching band and the composition classes and the ear train. I mean, everything. And I was there all day, every day, practicing, working. I was playing in the marching band after school. And then I was also blessed to grow up. There was a really great drum shop there called Zampino's Drum Shop,
Hmm.
and it's since been gone. But I mean, to have a drum shop in this tiny little town in I grew up in Massillon, Ohio, but Canton, Ohio was right beside it, where the Football Hall of Fame is. And there was a drum shop there, and Roy Burns came and did it. It was my first clinic. Bernard Purdy came there.
Man.
All these guys that I ended up meeting and seeing, and there was great teachers. Scott Gruel was my teacher. He ended up buying the shop years later. It's out of business now. He retired, but um, I was just constantly doing it. So I would go to school, I would take all these classes, I would go to marching band, I would go teach at the little kids at the school for a couple hours, and then I would go do a gig at night. And I did that from 9 to 3 in the morning, 6 nights a week, all the way through high school, just playing constantly, doing gigs constantly, and then went to the University of Miami School of Music. But one of the key factors, and I'm sorry I'm rambling on this question, but
Oh,
one
this
of the
is
key
good.
factors was my second or my minor in high school was architectural engineering, and I just liked it. I never wanted to do it. I just dug it.
Yeah.
And now it's funny because all the ability to draw mechanical drawings and blueprints and everything, I do that for instrument development with all the companies. I draw like a lot of the mechanical drawings for Mapex designs and all that stuff. But what happened was they gave us in high school the first computer aided drafting. I'm old, so like the computers, they had little green screen text, and
What they were
they were the,
Pong, we used to play Pong
yeah,
on it,
yeah, exactly. Pong was like, that's a big deal. Like, you kidding me?
right?
And so I actually learned how to do architectural drawings on the computer in high school. And one of the factories came to the high school and came to my class and offered everybody in the class a job because they said, you kids actually have more training on these computers than the guys working at the factory. So we
Wow.
want to offer everyone in this class a job. There was 11 guys, and I remember it paid $31,000 a year, and that was in 1980. 6 or 5, something like that. And that was good money back then, especially in Ohio,
Yeah.
And so everybody in the class took it, and they go, "Well, Russ, what are you accepting the position?" I said, "No, I'm going to be a famous drummer." you know? And the whole class kind of looked at, like, "What is this guy talking about? What are you talking about?" And that was it. My point to that, to make a long story even more unbearable, my point was that that's all I ever wanted to do. I started playing when I was
Mm.
8. Everything I could do in school, everything I could do after school, and I was going to be a drummer. That's what I was going to do. And I haven't ever. I mean, I had a couple little jobs. I valet parked, and I worked at Wendy's and different stuff when I couldn't get gigs, in college and whatnot. But I've pretty much been a professional musician my whole life. So
That's fantastic. But I want to know, since you grew up in Ohio and not far from Canton, didn't anybody ever say, don't you want to play football?
yeah, of course. Well, I did play football, and
Really?
who was played football with me was Chris Spielman, who ended up becoming, yeah, he ended up going to the NFL and having an amazing Hall of Fame career.
Right.
Yeah, and we what happened was I was playing football, and I couldn't get out of a game without getting hurt, you know. And I would just, something would happen.
Mm.
You'd either stub your finger or something would, you'd sprain an ankle. And then I couldn't do my gigs and stuff. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And then the football games on Friday night started to interfere with my gigs, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go play. so
Yeah. Why did I didn't know that University of Miami had that great of a music program until Jonathan Dressel said that he went there.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And did did you think about maybe going to Indiana University or Berkeley or anything? Did you
Yeah.
weigh out?
I actually got a scholarship to Berkeley. And I went and looked at it, and I wasn't really, there was 430 percussion majors when I went there. And I University of Miami, they had a studio music and jazz performance major. So for me, that was like spot on. And there was 35 guys there. And it was one of the top 5 music schools. So North Texas State and Indiana and U of M and Berkeley and for contemporary music anyway, Juilliard and the more classical. But I just was excited. And to be honest with you, I didn't want to go to the snow. I was like, I grew up in the snow, and I'm like, I am over schlepping my drums in the snow, man. Like
Right.
shoveling my cases out to the car, and I'm like, I'm going to Miami, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Good choice. Good choice.
Yeah.
So now, if I remember correctly, then in Miami, didn't you do some Miami Sound Machine things?
Yeah,
What's
all those guys that were based out of there, I worked with all those guys that, there's a small group there's a lot of sessions there for Afro-Cuban music. But as far as touring stuff, it was mainly those guys that were based out of that area. And yeah, there was some Raul de Blasio, who's a very famous, like sort of the Yanni of Latin America, and then of course Gloria and John Cicada, who was there at that time, and Roberto Pereira was a jazz harpist. Nestor Torres was a jazz flautist that were based out of there. I played with a bunch of different people in those areas and did a lot of session stuff there in Miami. I actually, I got my endorsements with, I ended up signing endorsements with Yamaha and Zildjian and Remo and everybody off those gigs from Miami before I had moved to LA in 95.
Well, so you were in Miami for like 10 years or so,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and you were having a really good career, and you're doing a lot of sessions, but a lot of Cuban kind of Latin-y kind of things.
Yeah.
And would you say that that's influenced you a lot, or do you do other styles? I mean, I'm just
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it did. The funny part about that was growing up in Ohio, I had no, I thought, we put flowers in congas in Ohio. I mean, we don't even know what to do with that stuff in Ohio. So I had done a bunch of gigs and casuals and did some big band stuff and toured a little bit with different artists coming out of Ohio right before I went to college and that summer and stuff before that. And I went there to University of Miami and I thought, okay, I had a couple small scholarships from the Musicians Union and different things like that, but I still had to pay for college myself. So I'm like, oh, I'll just get casuals. I'll do wedding gigs and cruise ships or whatever. I couldn't get arrested, because I couldn't play any Latin music. I had no idea, and I couldn't even get like I remember auditioning for the $75 cruise ship thing that went out every day and came back on this little casino boat. And they're like, man, you don't know anything about Latin music. So I actually, it's a funny story. I actually got a job valet parking at this really nice restaurant in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I would save up my money valet parking. And I had met Hector Nesiasoup. Now, if you know Alex Nesiasoup, who you know as Alex Acuna more, because that's his stage name. But Hector is Alex's nephew. And so I met Hector, who was this great musician and percussionist in Miami, and he was doing everything you could do there. And I would call Hector and I would hire him to come to my apartment, and I would pay him for a gig and have him play all this stuff on hand percussion. And I would write everything out. And I was just trying to learn, like, what are the rhythms for these, if somebody calls a merengue or somebody calls a Wawanko or cha-cha-cha or whatever, that I would know like what all the stuff was. And at that point, there wasn't books and DVDs. Now it's everywhere, right? You can get what you want, but there wasn't that much. There was some great books on it, but they were 200 long page books about how to play. I was like, dude, I just want to play a cha-cha at the Cohen bar mitzvah on Friday night. I don't want 200 pages of Afro-Cuban music, right? So I was trying to figure that out, and that's how I did it. I hired Hector, and I learned that, and then I came up with this whole system of learning these styles, and that system became the Drum Set Crash Course book, which was my first book for Warner Brothers, and that's what that book was. I Sandy Feldstein, the president of Warner Brothers, and he said, I haven't seen a system like this to learn music styles. And he took it for the weekend and came back with, he gave it back to me with marks on every page, like it was destroyed. And I'm like, oh, I guess you hated the book, right? He goes, no, I loved it. We're putting it out. Go fix everything I just marked, And that was my first book, The Drum Set Crash Course, in 1996 with Warner Brothers.
Well, the whole time you were talking about playing Latin stuff, all I learned was like a bossa nova. And all I knew was if anybody said it's Latin, that's what I would play.
You just play that. That's it.
And then it took me forever to figure out there are a lot of different kinds of Latin rhythms.
There are, yeah.
Unbelievable amount. And
it is, and they're, they're very defined, just changing a certain thing puts it into another grouping, another genre. And, there's a lot of things you got to know. They're a little bit legalistic about it in some ways, like you play the mambo cowbell pattern in the wrong part of a salsa tune, the whole, they're going to turn around and go, yo, what are you doing? So you gotta kind of know what's going on. But like the two become one record with Gio, when Gio and I sat down to talk about doing that, one of the things that we wanted to do was kind of mesh all those things together. We didn't want to make an Afro-Cuban record or Afro-Brazilian record. We wanted to just make something from the Latino, world where it all just sort of came together. And that's sort of the two become one thing, where Gio and I kind of meeting in this place where it kind of creates another genre or another sound that if you listen to those, you'll hear, like, he might be playing Brazilian figures on the congas and I might be playing a Peruvian thing on the drum set, and it's in an Afro-Cuban tune, and we came up with all that kind of stuff to sort of create this world of rhythm thing for it.
Well, I want to ask you, there was a time when I would go out and buy the record and I would open it up and I would read all the liner notes and I would know who's playing and I would get all that.
Yeah.
But I don't have that right now, but I have you. So,
Well, I'll send you one. It's right here. I
well,
got it, and I'm going to stick it right here on my assistant's table, and it's going to go out to you tomorrow. There we go. It's coming to you.
oh, fantastic. Well, this is what I wanted to ask though. Did you write a lot of these? Did you write them with him? Did you write most of the music? And how did that all come about?
Yeah, well, I got my solo band, which is called Arrival. We have 4 records with that band, which is Jerry Watts plays bass, and then Rick Creevy, a lifelong friend of mine, who's an amazing musician, singer, arranger, piano player. That trio is what I tour with for my band and for those records. So I use that
Mhm.
trio, but Rick couldn't do all the sessions for that. So I got a very famous Brazilian musician that I've done his records, and he's done played on mine over the years, named Rike Pantoja. And Rike is a very well known pianist and writer in Brazil. So Rike and Jerry Watts, a bass player from Arrival, and I were the core band, and we went. We met Gio. We all went to Criteria Recording Studios in Miami, which is a legendary studio where everything from Layla with Eric Clapton to the Bee Gees to everything been recorded, and one of the great studios in the world. And we for 5 days, that core band with Gio, and then I brought in Richie Bravo, who's a good friend of mine, who's probably the top percussionist in Miami, and he plays on everything you've ever heard, Shakira and Gloria, and Juanes and Enrique Iglesias, everybody. And he played timbales and some shakers and stuff. But the core band is Gio, Enrique, Jerry, and I.
Mm.
And then we came back out here after those sessions, and I had the Vine Street Horns play horn, which is Phil Collins' horn section, and George Shelby and Harry Kim and
George.
all these guys.
Yeah.
And yeah, so those guys are on it. And but that's it. It's the same band on every track. And then as far as the music, yeah, Rike had some amazing compositions that he brought in, and we rearranged a little bit, and then I and Rike wrote a few, and Gio and I put a couple together. So yeah, it's all. And then there's 2 covers. There's a really unique arrangement of Things We Say Today from the Beatles. That is like a partito alto Brazilian arrangement with Rick singing, and that's really cool. And then there's another one, which is Love of My Life. And you might not remember that, but it was on Santana's Supernatural record with Dave Matthews. And
Yeah.
but it was sort of a hip hoppy New Jack Swing thing with Carter Beauford playing drums on that record. And we turned it into this really beautiful ballad cha cha. And I have a friend of mine, Jimmy Riccolo, who's a Miami guy who played with Gloria for years on guitar and sang. Um, he sang on that and played guitar and stuff. So there's 2 covers. The rest we all wrote. Yeah.
So, can I play a little bit of that quick?
Yeah.
This.
Where you are, that's where I wanna be. Through your eyes are all the things I wanna see. And in the night, you are my dreams. You're everything to me.
So that was the ballad you were talking about, or the Love of My Life,
Yeah.
the cover. And well, this is what I wanted to ask you about the mixing of it, because I love how it's mixed, and the drums sit in the mix of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, Brad Hanel is he's one of the best engineers in the world, and this record is up for 6 categories for the Grammys, and one of them is engineering, and
it's
maybe
amazing,
Latin Jazz Album of the Year or stuff like that. But engineering for Brad, and you know, Brad and I have done a ton of stuff together, from the Nelly Furtado records to you know. Resident Evil movies to Onward from Pixar that's out right now. I mean,
right?
we do tons of stuff. I just it was such a special project with Giovanni because first off, I love the guy dearly. He's a sweetheart, and he's certainly the best legendary conga player in history, maybe, you know, I mean, but he had some real bad health problems, and he's lost now parts of 4 fingers. And
Oh,
this is the first record that he's done as a leader or a co-leader collaboration since he's lost some of his limbs on his, and he had to relearn all the touch. Of course, he can play all the rhythms and do everything, but he had to kind of relearn the whole thing. So this is a very special project, and I wanted to help bring it to life with our label, and it's of course an honor for me to do it because we've known each other for years, and to be able to do it together is great. And I just threw everything at it, to be honest. It was recorded in 3296 kilohertz, and it's mixed in DTS HD surround. We have a surround disc, and it's just done at the highest level. And so I begged Brad to go to Criteria. We took him with us to Miami, and he engineered all the sessions and then brought it all back and mixed in this state of the art studio. I mean, the soundproofing in this mix room costs $500,000. I mean,
yeah.
it's unbelievable. I wish everybody could hear when you hear that you're in that kind of room with it in surround. It's like, this is the way everybody needs to hear music, not with AirPods on an MP3.
Right.
Lord help us. Like,
I know it kind of, that reminds me of way back when I was a kid, and when I describing buying the album,
yeah.
I would sit, listen to it. I had my really nice stereo,
Yeah.
and I had clipped speakers and a nice Marantz receiver, and I would sit back and I would listen like an audiophile kind of thing. And nobody really does that anymore.
It's a shame, because you know what happens? There's 2 things. One, you don't get to get your ears inside of the composition as much. That's the first thing. And the second thing is there's an amazing opportunity for the mind's eye to create its own visual scenario based upon what you're hearing, right? And we have generations of people now that can't do that. They have to see the visual of it. You know, it's almost impossible to just release just music anymore without having video tied to it in some way, you know, because people have lost that ability to see it and hear it in their mind's eye because of what they're listening to.
Well, and here's the other thing that you can do when you sit in that studio and listen to this mix is phenomenal, by the way. I was just listening to it, and I was listening to it through my earbuds, you know, and I could tell, but what you can't hear in the earbuds are all the nuances. If you were sitting in the middle of that room, it would be easier to pick out the parts and pick out the little shaker or pick out a string or whatever it is, or a tom fill or a little ghosted snare note, that you will never hear the nuances of those things in some earbuds.
It's really difficult. Yeah. Because I mean, the diaphragm in those earbuds is tiny. It's so tiny. But yeah, the sweep of the brushes and all that clarity and the transients that you hear with really good speakers is amazing. So, you know, we have the 5.1 HD mixes here, and we're going to run vinyl for the record, which is cool. But we're probably going to run a super audio CD and sell 3 of them. You know, my mom and my wife and my kid might buy them, but you know, I don't care because it's so cool. I just don't care.
It's like you got to do it at least once. You've got to do it just for your own gratification and for your own pleasure, to be able to sit and go like, wow, okay, I did this. And you know what? You could open up a ride where you go and you open up the studio, charge people $10, come in and sit down and listen in a nice big studio. On their own. Maybe we could start doing that. It'd be social distancing.
That's it, 1 person at a time because of the social distancing. But yeah, it's a great idea.
Okay, so we're going to play the record. You get to go in, you get to go into the studio and listen to it through, you know, and here's, you know, you pay $20, then next person. I mean, geez, just to have the experience of hearing it.
It's unbelievable. I mean, Brad, you know, and Brad, it was funny because with the movie stuff, there's a little bit more confinement to how silly you can get with the surround thing. It's got to be positioned. And if the airplane's flying over here in the movie, you got to pan it over there, and you got, you know, whatever. So it's so fun with music because you're not tied to the visual. So there's times where he would have like the timbali player solo behind you in your right ear, and the congas over here, and just hearing like it's like you're sitting in a section with Richie Bravo and Giovanni Hidalgo, and I mean what it feels like for me to be there, when I'm recording it, and it's just amazing, man. I love it, and I let Brad just go nuts with it, and just go crazy and make it amazing. So I said, look, man, if we're going all out, I'm on the Grammy voting, stuff. Let's get it in there. Let's see if we can get somebody to pay attention to it.
Yeah, fantastic. And the other thing that I was thinking that I mentioned earlier is your solos were really interesting because they would be conversations with congas or whatever it was, and your use of space sort of struck me. Like you do a thing and a rest, and then a thing and a rest.
Right.
Oh, okay, that's kind of cool.
Well,
and
and where I started really, Adam Nussbaum, and when I spent some time with Adam, he talked a lot about Papa Joe Jones and Elvin Jones and Philly Joe Jones and the guys who spent a lot of time studying and executing similar articulations to horn players on the drums. Max Roach is another one. And why was Sinatra such an amazing jazz singer? His phrasing and articulation was like Michael Brecker level jazz articulation and phrasing. And it was like listening to a horn player with a beautiful New York attitude about it, singing out of his horn, but it had lyrics. And that's a lot of the way Adam, influenced me a lot about. And Peter Erskine, I've done it where I've transcribed Freddie Hubbard solos and put stickings to them and learned to play solo ideas with intent, as if I was a horn player, and phrasing them that way, and not thinking so drummer. A drummer thinks, a horn player thinks, right?
mm-hmm.
And there's a difference in there. Even if you can't pick out why it's happening, it makes you feel different.
Right. And singing the notes instead of just singing rhythms.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Everything that you said, conjures up another question, and I don't want to forget all of them because I got a lot of them.
Okay.
What taking some of the stuff that you have learned from Peter, what is that like sitting with Peter Erskine and picking his brain on some things?
Basically terrifying. The first word that I would come up with. No, first off, I love him to death. I've known him for many years, and as with Freddie Gruber, when I was studying with Freddie, or any of the guys, even Ed Thickman, you would go there, and Ed would lay something on me, or Freddie would lay something on me, as Peter, where I'm like, okay, all right, I'll be back in 3 months. Like let me go connect with that. Let me get my head where it has to be to even understand what we're doing. Then let me physically be able to do that. Then let me put it to practice in some way where I feel like I have some command over it, and then I'll bring it back to you, and we'll go from there. And a lot of times that's what happens. Where he would say, I would go there, for instance, and he has a Disklavier piano, the Yamaha Disklavier, where you can put a MIDI file in it, and the actual piano plays, right? So it's right. A player piano. You've seen them, like the modern ones. So the drums, the ride cymbal is right beside the edge of the keyboard, right? I mean, it reminds me of how Jeff Hamilton's trio plays, where they're all like within a 8-9 foot area, and the band's mixing itself in this perfect way where you're like, everybody's playing. And and then he'll put like Cherokee in the piano. It's like 320 BPM, and play along with that, and I'm like, I'm just trying to get my hand to even play that fast. It's too loud. It's too loud, and I want to hear the piano. I want to hear the nuance on the piano. And you're trying to like, how can I get this thing to make sense with this piano as if, nobody's playing it, but it's very similar to somebody playing it. And then, there's a discussion about, let me explain something to you. If you play too loud, that guy hits the keys harder. When he starts to hit the keys harder because he's trying to hear himself and feel confident, you take away a percentage of his facility, right? Because now he's got to dig in harder. So now he can't do everything that he wants to do with ease, right? And you're causing that. And the guy who doesn't cause that and lets that guy have complete freedom and are, a full range of dynamics in his playing makes him so much more comfortable to play with. And I mean, there's that kind of, what do you do with that discussion? Bye. I'll see you in 2021. When you know what I mean? It's one of those, that's the kind of lessons that happen. And, it's not, right, left, right, page 25, come back page 26 next week. That's not what we're doing, at this point. It's stuff like that where you go, okay, let me go back and adjust my touch on the cymbal and see if I can articulate quicker with a lighter approach and, all that stuff.
It's musicality, though. It's musicianship.
It absolutely
is
well,
what,
Jeff,
what he's teaching.
I think the biggest divide right now in this business is musicians who play drums and drummers. I think that's the biggest divide. And the kid that owns a video camera in his bedroom isn't getting the opportunity to play music. He's playing drums a lot, and we've got a generation of drummers who can play the drums incredible. I mean, there's incredible drumming happening. There's no question, but the music level is way down.
And I've had this conversation with all of the musicians that I've been talking to about what it is to play together, and especially right now, when we're all isolated. And like you, I think you're probably are doing a lot of recording at your home or doing lessons through
here
Zoom.
At the studio, I do a lot here, and I you know what, I've been doing it for years. Like Dave Weckl and I were laughing because he's like, he looks at me and we were hanging out. We're driving our cars on the racetrack not too long ago, and he kind of looks at me and he's like, "Is your life much different than it was before?" I'm like, "Not really." It's kind of sad. I mean, I'm not doing my touring stuff, but like here, it's like I've been doing this for 15 years, doing sessions at my place and putting them on the internet and all that stuff. So.
Right. So that's not uncommon for you, and you've been doing things that way. However, a lot of your learning about musicianship comes from being with musicians, and like the thing you're doing with Peter, and the things that, like I said, when I stood behind you and I stared at how you were playing and listening to how it sounded and feeling the drums, in proximity, which is all the rounded musicianship.
Yeah.
And then you got the guys just sitting at home learning all the chops.
Yeah.
They get to have that experience to sit next to a guy and say, "Hey, dude, don't play so loud."
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, and all those circumstances that makes you change the way you play. I mean, as much as you would hate, playing at somebody's wedding or whatever, I mean, you had to learn that, they're eating dinner and the band leader just called, Fly Me to the Moon. And, you want it to pick up where it's supposed to pick up with, when the band blows up, in those arrangements, but you got to do it in a way that doesn't blow everybody out. And I mean, just all that stuff that happens, playing gigs. And I think part of it is, that our generation of guys, we grew up playing gigs. I mean, every 100 million horrible gigs. I mean, it just, and every one of them was a learning experience. And the other thing that happens, and Billy Sheehan and I, we're talking about this, where we would do sound checks together and we would end up playing like all these rock songs, cover rock songs, and just laughing that I can't believe we know these. But it's you gain your repertoire is huge because you've learned so much music and so many songs and so many styles. And we're calling out 80s rock songs and just knowing the parts and playing them, and because we all grew up doing nightclub gigs and all that stuff, top 40 gigs and whatnot.
Right. And knowing you and some of the other drummers that I talked to, you study the instrument. So when you play those songs, you also not only want to just play the part, you want to like emulate the feel. Like, how do you play Billie Jean to make it feel right?
Yeah.
How do you play that country song Crazy and make it feel right?
Absolutely.
You know,
I mean, that's part of the language, right? Because I mean, one of the things that I always say is, you have to hear a language. This is a language. Music is a language. We're talking to each other. The band is having a conversation, and we're having it in front of an audience that is interested in that conversation. And you cannot have a conversation with someone in a specific language unless you've heard that language spoken to you. I mean, you can't just read Spanish. It will never sound Spanish, right? You got it, or French. I mean, you can't read French and never ever sound French. So you can't read the notes for swing music and sound like a swing player, or Afro-Cuban music and look at the rhythm on a piece of paper and go, okay, I know how to play Afro-Cuban music. It's like, no, you don't, because you don't understand about the role of time in there. And, it's not a ping pong ball on a smooth surface like rock music is. It's an egg on a surface rolling, and all those discussion points that we've learned over the years to help execute that stuff.
There's another thing I want to get to, but I want to ask you about your concept of the floating time in one of your lessons and how much you use that in your movie recording and all that stuff, where hopefully I'll describe this right. So the kick drum, the downbeat is always there, but when you're playing your snare drum or other things, you can adjust it, maybe play it a little ahead or play it a little behind, or move it around and do that. Do you use and how do you develop that concept and do it accurately? And then do you use that a lot in a lot of your movies and session playing?
Yeah, there's a couple things to that. First, everyone has natural positioning if I mean, let's assume they can play time really well. Okay. So once you've crossed that point and you have control over playing solid, good feeling time, everyone has a natural positioning of where those things fall in relation to how you hear certain grooves. Gad plays very behind. JR plays pretty much in the center. Sonny Emery plays very ahead. There's all, it's just natural, and it comes from analyzing a lot of those guys. And the way Elvin played swing very behind, but Davey Tuff and Sonny Payne were very on top in swing playing. And but Shelly Mann was very much in the center because he did a lot of session work. And what happens in session work, for me, the reason that I talk about that and the reason I think that I've analyzed it a lot is because of the session stuff. And you can't just apply your natural pocket to everything when you're a session musician. If, Gad is getting hired to be Steve Gadd on 99.9% of the records for the past 30 years. But, there was a time before that where he wasn't Steve Gadd yet, and you were just a drummer being hired to do stuff. And we all go through that. I mean, in recent years, nobody asked me to change my snare drum anymore, or because they just like use whatever drum you want, but back in the day I had 30 snare drums because I was just a drummer. And at that time, you had to figure out what was going on in these tracks, especially for my generation who, I wasn't raised with clicks and machines until I was leaving high school.
Mm.
and keep in mind that no human in history had ever heard perfect time until 1983, right? Where the Lindrum was invented, right? We had never heard what it feels like to have perfect time. I mean, listen, the records before that, but time's all over. I mean, the Earth, Wind, and Fire, the time is everywhere. It's all over, and the whole band just sort of ebbs and flows with the whole band, and it just works, and it feels good, and everything's fine. But in 1983, humans were given this perfect time, and it changed the way everyone plays instruments from that point forward, because we had to learn to get as close to that as possible, but more importantly to interact with it, because it was now a part of what we were doing. Now it's happening for pitch, right? Everybody's tuning everything, right? But if you listen to Sarah Vaughan and all that, they had amazing pitch. The Andrews sisters' pitch was amazing, but there's a lot of stuff where the pitch was, no one had heard perfectly tuned vocals. How are you going to have perfectly tuned vocals until there was auto tune and that stuff? So now we're getting used to everything being perfectly in tune, all the horns, everything, and that's now become part of it. But to answer your question, that's a study and an analyzation of me and some other guys of going, okay, how much can I apply a feel to this, and how much do I have to adjust it to interact with what's already been placed in this piece? It could be programmed, whatever. And so then I got to come up to that and not lay back as far, or I got to be able to do those things. Or, it's a 12/8 ballad, you mentioned Crazy, there's Patsy Cline singing that song in 12/8, crazy, boom, boom, right? You can hear there's like this little space from when it should happen to when it does happen for that backbeat. And that's the stuff that makes that, it's called a lilt, right? It makes that falling feeling. Crazy, boom, boom, bing, right? There's this like fall from the center of time to where it actually happens. And being able to analyze that and control it, that's what that's all about. And to be honest with you, it really has everything to do with understanding the lengths of notes. And for a drummer, that's very difficult, because we don't execute the off of a note. We only execute the on, right? So a horn player executes the on and the off, and thus is control of the sustain. He can make that sustain adjustment, which will affect the next note's positioning, right? So if it's longer, the next note's going to come in later. If it's shorter, the next note can come in ahead of time. And having the ability to play the on and the off of a note gives us the ability to control sustain. For drummers, it's always the same. That's a 16th note, that's an 8th note, that's a half note, that's a whole note. They all sound the same. and we wait, right? We wait for the amount of time. And so to adjust that waiting period, I'm hearing the length of the notes. Brushes help a lot with that, because you become responsible for the sustain with the brushes. Like if you were playing a horn, I now have to play the off of a note and not just the on. And I think that's the hard part about brushes for drummers, because it's not, yes, there's lateral motions and there's things that you got to work on physically, but I think the concept of brushes is difficult for drummers, because they just go, wait a minute, what do you mean? Like, I got to play the sustain of the whole note, like the whole note, and yeah, that's it. So that all of those things combined kind of lead to that, but that's really what it's all about.
And it's fun picking that apart and analyzing it and thinking about it.
Yeah.
For me, because I pay attention now that I'm doing sound, I spend more time just really listening and paying attention to where all that stuff is.
Sure.
I also want to ask you about your involvement in I understand why you were involved in designing the sub kick and the groove wedge and that stuff based on your what you learned in school with your
the engineering stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did the sub kick come about?
all those instruments are really necessity as a mother of invention stuff. I mean, I was doing a lot of hip hop sessions with that whole crowd of people in that era, and they were programming stuff on. Back then, it was an MPC 60 or an MPC 2000, right? The Akai stuff. They would program stuff with these Godzilla sounds on them that were like
Right.
mountainous. And then they would call us in and go, okay, well, you play in the chorus. We want this for the verse, and then you play in the chorus. Or we want this beat, but we want it to feel different, so you play this beat. But then they got these Godzilla sounds, and my poor little drums, they're going like, dude, we can't do that. So, we started to really mess with head combinations and things. And then we were hearing out of the drums the frequencies, but they weren't getting captured. And that was really due to the fact that the speaker and the microphones, and as you know, being an engineer, like every diaphragm in a mic is a speaker. It's just wired backwards. But they're tiny, right? Even a bass drum speaker or diaphragm in like a Beta 52 is about maybe 3/4 of an inch,
Right.
And so the big sound wave. So there was an old technique. I mean, Paul McCartney used it on the White Album with the Beatles, where they would hang speakers in front of the bass amp, and it would pick up the big waves and wire them backwards and make a huge mic, basically. So I started to putz around with that, and then I wanted to put it into a something to protect it. And then also I had the idea of, what if I put it in the drum shell and we put heads on it? We'll be able to change the pitch of it by tuning it. And that totally worked, because now we have it in this chamber, and then when you adjust the heads, you can change the pitch of the low note on the bass drum. So if you want it to be in the key of the song with the bass for a recording, you can tune it into it. If you wanted to get it out because it's building up too much, you can get it out of the same, so it doesn't build up in that frequency. And so it gave it that flexibility, and it made it obviously way easier to move around and protect it, rather than hanging a speaker on a coat hanger or something like they used to do. Right. And that's really how that happened. And the Groove Wedge was the same thing. I was doing the Moulin Rouge movie, and we were doing remakes of these tunes and some other pieces. And I was using, at that time, I had a 12-inch Yamaha bamboo snare drum, and it was going to be my signature drum for Yamaha. And we had come up with using bamboo in these shells, and it was working great. But the problem was, the bamboo is very small, right? Very small, like trees. So we would have to cut pieces and then glue them together to make a big sheet, and then bend them into the drums. Well, when you got the diameter too small, like a 12, they were starting to crack, and they wouldn't do that well. So Takashi Hagiwara, who we all called Hagi was the head of Yamaha drums, and he said, look, we'll still make the drum, but we got to factor the loss into the price, and blah, blah, blah. And I had developed the Groove Wedge on there because it was a 12, and I wanted to be able to play cross sticks. And you can't get to the sweet spot of the stick on a 12. It goes out past the drum, right? So I said, well, I did the wood hoops, the vintage wood hoops. I did those with Hagi. And I said, I want a piece of our vintage wood hoop that we invented out past the edge of the drum so I can play a cross stick. So then I drew up the drawings, and I gave them to Hagi, and we started to work on that. And pretty much what I drew up is what it is. And that's what it was. And what happened was when they factored in the loss of the bamboo in the drums, it got too expensive. The drum was going to be like $1,100 or something. And I said, look, forget it. Just release the Groove Wedge, because that's sort of the invention, and that's why we just released that. And that kind of blew up. Those things are selling for like $300 on eBay now. They're like,
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I think the fact that you had that architectural drawing in high school probably really helped you to be able to come up with that idea and then give it to somebody and say, here, try this. Don't you think?
It does. And now, I'm the lead artist for the Mapex drums for R&D and the design lab for them. And I've done all the Mapex drums since, I started doing it in 2012, but by the time the public saw it, it would have been like 2016. So from after Saturn, like Saturn V on, like all the new snare drums, the entire design lab thing for me, the whole project of those kits, all the new BP snare drums, the new artist drums, and the new mounts and everything that's coming out, all that stuff. And I literally work with the design team in Taiwan, and I do a lot of the preliminary drawings and give it to them. So it gets it really close, you know, and what happens is it allows me to create prototypes here in the US and test everything before it gets to them. So it takes a big chunk of the time away, also saves a lot of money, that it's already tested and prototyped before Taiwan gets it and then figures out how to make it, basically.
Wow. And you get it made and then you bring it into your studio there or wherever it is and test it.
Yeah.
And there's a place that will mock up a rim or a shell or something for you here.
Yeah, and I work with some shell manufacturers in the U.S. to build prototype stuff. If I can't get it from Taiwan, or some stuff I just putz around with before I even present it to them to see if it'll work. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It might not. Mm-hmm. Some stuff just doesn't work. But I have here, you know, I have a pretty extensive inventory of gear just for studio stuff. I got all my old Rogers kits and my old Ludwig sets and Gretsch and, you know, all that stuff, and a whole bunch of snare drums. And then I actually invested in all of the high-end drums for every one of the manufacturers. And all right, I'll show you really quick, Jeff. You're gonna
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Hopefully you can see this. I'm walking you into, this is the studio where this is called the inventory warehouse room. I don't know if you can see, but
oh man, it's like a drum store.
It's here's the snare drum wall with all the, you know, snare drums that, like, for the studio, and there's all kinds of, I mean, everything's there. But I mean, you can see I got, like, there's about 17 or 18 kits in here, all on the walls, and they're everything's in here.
Oh, have you heard that term jonesing?
Yeah,
I'm jonesing for a good snare drum right now.
Right, I know.
Yeah. Well, wait, do you have a Fibes drum set or a Zico or a North?
I have a North. I have I have a Fibes snare drum. Yeah, I don't have the whole kit, but I do have acrylic drums in there.
Oh man.
Yeah, and so I mean, anyway, my point of that, other than being a complete drum nerd, my point of that is that I have all the top drums from all the companies. So what I do is I do a lot of A/B testing of stuff for Mapex, where and a lot of companies don't do that. You know, they don't bring in everybody else's stuff and confirm that what they're saying in marketing is actually true. You know, but one of the things that we do with Mapex is I A/B it against everything, so that we know, like, if we say, like, this thing stands up against this or that, it really does, and I'm able to know. I have reports of audio A/Bs with every major manufacturer's high-end drums, and it's great because it teaches me a lot about what works and what doesn't work in drum sounds and designs.
Wow, that's great. I love that, man. I love that room.
There's a lot of stuff in there, man. There's some of my favorite. And dude, I'm totally nerd because
you have a studio. And
no, I was saying I'm totally a nerd because a few years ago I was like, oh, you did? Am I here? Am I still here?
Yeah, no, you're back now.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I was thinking,
there you are.
A few years ago I was just like, you know what? I got all these drums, and when I was a kid, I didn't have any money, so I used to stare at the Gretsch catalog, and there was that Rosewood. You probably remember this catalog. There was a Rosewood stop sign era Gretsch kit, it had like 6 toms. You remember that catalog? And I used to look at that thing like, I'll never have a drum set like that, like, and so like a year and a half ago, I just found one. I bought like 2 of them to get the sizes I want, and they were showing up at the house, and my wife's like, what is this? And I'm like, don't ask. I'm like, I'm getting the drum set I always wanted, So I have a lot of that stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic. We're at an hour and 5 minutes.
Okay.
I don't want to keep you longer than
Yeah.
I mean, this is great. I mean, I'll talk about drums forever. And I'm loving all of this. I wanted to ask you, go quick before we sign off, about your the sessions and what you still are doing right now, and what's coming down the pipe for kind of recording work, and is that keeping you busy through the pandemic? And
It is.
And then finally, to wrap it up, how is the family and how are you all doing?
Oh yeah, everybody's okay. I have my assistant and that works for me here. She's working from home. She works for me all the time at the studio. And then I have another guy, Harold, who's like, does video editing and all that. And we've set him up to work from home a lot. So my employees or the people that work for me, we're just kind of doing that. I mean, they come in and pick something up or whatever, but yeah, we've separated. My wife and daughter are doing fine. It's a little odd with my daughter not going to school, but luckily her school had an online program already set up, so they just sort of clicked over to it, and she's been doing great. I mean, everybody's fine. We're all healthy. We're being very careful. Yeah, I've been super busy, to be honest. I got a lot of stuff going on. We had a big launch of all the new snare drums with Mapex, and we filmed all the videos for every drum. Those are at Mapex Drums USA, and there's 14 new snare drums. So that was a lot of work, just recording and filming all that and doing voiceovers, and then we edit everything here and help them out with that. And I just the last 2 movies that I did that are out is Onward, the Pixar movie, and that one was kind of the last one in the theater before COVID. I think it was in the theater for like a couple weeks, and then and then COVID hit, and then it went to like Disney streaming or whatever. But that one's really fun. If you get the Blu-ray, there's shots of me and everybody in the making of the music thing on the Blu-ray. So you can see me and Neil Steubenhouse and everybody recording the soundtrack stuff.
Oh, that's fantastic. One thing, I've had a bunch of drummers, but I've failed to really get a lot of bass players, to talk to a lot of bass players.
Oh, well, we know those guys. We can hook you up with that. Yeah, and then the one before that was Addams Family that was out, the animated Addams Family. And I just, like the past week or 2, I just did Connected, which is the new Sony animation movie that's coming. I don't know when this stuff's being released because I don't know if they're going to hold it, but it's called Connected. And then I do the new Matt Damon movie on August 1st and 2nd.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah. So
and you record them in your house though there.
This studio, I had my other studio for 21 years. It was a building on my property, in the back of my property. And we sold that we've been in the same place 21 years. We bought our sort of dream house, and my wife just kind of looked at me and went, are we going to do a studio again? Kind of like, and I'm like, okay, no. So I actually got a commercial building, and this facility is a commercial building. I mean, it's just my personal studio. I mean, we have a tracking room and control room, and of course the warehouse I showed you, and the lobby here where we're in. But it's a commercial building now. It's not at the house, so I come to work every day, which has been a little weird for me, to be honest. I to not be at home is odd. But it's kind of cool. It's now when I go home, I kind of look at what do we do here? I don't know what to do. I'm like, I play video games with my kid and hang out with my wife, and that's it.
It would feel weird to me to not have my stuff close.
I don't. That's been very odd. It's been very, very odd, but it's kind of cool. I come into work and I work I work long days and do stuff, and then I go home and have a family. It's been kind of good for that. So
Yeah, from that perspective, I can see where it would be more conducive to a happy family.
yeah. Yeah, and she, even though it was on the back of our property and there was a separate entrance, it was always like, there's people here. Like there's always people here, and
Yeah.
what's going on? And then
Yeah.
I remember when I was doing the Steve Perry's record. Steve Perry was at the house at the studio, and my wife was like a huge Journey fan. I was a huge Journey fan too. I mean, Steve Smith's a very close friend of mine, and we hang a lot. But I was doing Steve Perry's solo record, the one that just came out not too long ago, and she would never come out in the studio that much. But for that session, she was out there. Are you guys need anything to drink? Are you hungry? Can I get you anything? And I'm just kind of looking at like, you never come out here like that. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Steve's like, man, your wife's extremely hospitable. I'm like, yeah. For you, she is. Yeah, but
she's really nice. It's interesting. I go kind of fan out on people, and I did it once when I met Verdine White. And yeah. I was so tongue-tied because I grew up being such an Earth, Wind, and Fire. I didn't know how to talk to him. I just sort of stuttered. I'm like, man, you're really good, man.
Yeah. Remember when you played bass and you were dancing? Like it turned into like Chris Farley on SNL. But
right.
And those guys are sweethearts. I don't know Verdine that well, but I know Ralph Johnson well because he was with me at Yamaha, so we hung a lot over the years. And Ralph is a sweetheart. I mean, the guys are legends. I mean, how much more legendary can you get than Earth, Wind, and Fire? I mean, give me a break. And they're totally approachable, sweetheart guys that just love making music and playing. And
well, and that's the thing about a lot of artists like yourself, and I had Will Kennedy on beginning of the week, and you guys you're all when you're just hanging out. I mean, you're really easy going, easy to talk to, fun guys, and I want to flash back quick to the one gig that we did. You were talking about doing gigs, and I had like the greatest band in the world playing that silly thing in Santa Barbara. Harry Kim and George and you, and Aaron Jorgensen, and the whole time we were just told to be like, "You're too loud. You're too loud. Can you just play?" It's like, come on, man, this band can play. Let us play.
Yeah. Well, we don't care. And you know what's so fun about that? What's so funny about that is 2 nights before that, they may have been paid $500 a piece to watch Phil Collins, and Harry and George and Eric and all the guys were there, and we would laugh about that because, I would do something with Andrea Bocelli and then do something like that. And then they would say that and you would go, man, last night you couldn't even get close to us. The security would have kept you like, and you were begging us to play, paying $4 a ticket. But life is all presentation, isn't it?
It completely.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah.
But everybody, I think the best players in the world are the nicest guys. I mean, I love Will. Will and I used to set our drums up together in a drum studio and just play back and forth and practice, him and I. Yeah, years ago, I love Will. He's a great guy.
Well, I don't want to say, but drummers pretty much are like, they kind of rule the bands. We're kind of like the best guys.
Yeah, there's no great bands with bad drummers. That's it.
Yeah, case closed.
It's our show. That's it.
Oh man. Well, Russ, thank you so much. I mean, we didn't even really get into a lot of stuff about your schooling, your lessons that you can find. I've had your website, a link to your website up here the whole time.
Percussionpathway.com is the online school.
Oh, okay. But they can get to that through your website.
Oh yeah, if you just go to russmiller.com and then click Percussion Pathway, it goes right to it.
Yeah. So all of the stuff that we talked about, you can find on your website, because I scrolled through it and checked it. Your you're a drum writer and tech writer and all that kind of stuff. So it's really cool to be able to go
cool.
there.
Yeah, it's just fun stuff up there, and we try to keep the discography up to date. I gotta update it, but it's pretty thorough. But I haven't updated it for a little while.
And the Arrival record I still haven't listened to all. I mean, I've listened to that all the time. The one where you did all conversations with with Gad and all those. I love that record.
Thank
you.
Yeah, that's a once in a lifetime project. That thing was really amazing.
Well, and this last one, I mean, I went on a bike ride this morning and I listened to this whole record, and I was just struck by, as you stated, the engineering and the mixing and how it all sounded. It was great. It was stellar, man.
I'm just so happy, man, because it just came out yesterday, and when you do these records, you spend so much time and effort, and at this point, I don't know if it's even good anymore. You're just so tired of. You're like, please, I don't want to hear this music ever again. And we haven't even done one gig yet. But it's great to hear that people take to it. It reminds me of doing like comedians in a movie when they're doing funny stuff on set and no one's there to laugh. Going, is this funny? I don't know if this is funny. I mean, and then you go to a theater and see people laugh, and you're like, we did it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's always sort of hindsight. You do it, you get it done, and then you wait to see the responses, and then okay, well it was good.
Right. Well, I'm really glad you dig it. It was again, Gio is. I mean, to be in the room with Giovanni Hidalgo that's payment enough for anything, and it's an absolute joy. And that record is a real crowning achievement of my career. So we're praying that it does well. And
in the Grammys, especially, you if you get some Grammys, that'd be really great, right?
Yeah. And I would love to have Brad get it for engineering, and that would be awesome. But, he deserves it.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's in the sound guy world, rule of thumb: if the sound guy is testing the system, he's playing a Steely Dan record, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I was standing next to a guy one time, and somebody comes up and says, why do sound engineers always play Steely Dan to test the system? Well, because they sound good.
Right. They sound good.
So and this is one of those. I mean, it's just it sounds great.
All right. Well, good. Thank you. Yeah.
Of all of the tracks, is there one that I should play to take us out with?
Man, I love that arrangement of the Beatles tune, The Things We Say Today. I mean, it's so unbelievably different from the 50s rock version of, that song was a typical, eighth note rock, 60s rock thing with the Beatles, and to have it be sort of a partito alto Brazilian thing, and then we deliberately did like a Phil Collins drum sound on it, to make it like kind of really powerful, and I love that arrangement. That arrangement's up for Grammys for arrangement of an instrumental vocal of a cover song. So
and that's cool. Who did the arrangement?
Rick Creevy, the guy who sings on it, who's the guy in Arrival with me. Yeah.
Okay, so I will play that to take out. And thank you, Russ. I mean, I'm so glad that you did this, because I love talking shop, man.
I'm so glad we got to catch up. It's been a while, and I appreciate you asking me. It's an honor to do it, and it went so fast. You were like, we're at an hour and 5. I'm like, we just started. What are you talking about?
I know. I feel I'm happy that people say they'll give me an hour, and everybody always says, well, an hour, and then you talk for an hour and you realize you barely got everything in.
Right.
It's almost like when you're on a break on a gig and you're sitting and talking and you're just getting to the good part. And, okay, got to go back.
I haven't eaten my bandwich yet. I got my bandwich is here. Wait, hold on.
Wait, let me get my last bite in.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much, man. Anytime.
Right.
Please let me know anything I can do for you. Don't hesitate.
Okay, well, you might hear from me quite soon.
That's fine. Let's get you some bass players.
that would be helpful. And okay, so here we go with Things We Said Today.
You say you will love me if I have to go. You'll be thinking of me. Somehow I will know. Someday